everyone. My name is Reagan Henderson, and I am the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at Dorsey & Whitney. I am also a member of the conference planning committee, and will be introducing our final session, Grief Unplugged, How Grief Infiltrates Law Firm Culture, with our speaker, Heather Horton of the H² Group. Heather D. Horton is a grief recovery method specialist and workplace grief coach. She empowers attorneys struggling with grief to turn their pain into power. Heather also educates firm management and designs grief-informed law firm cultures so they can retain and maintain their greatest assets, attorneys. Heather is the founder of the H² Group, a location-independent grief recovery coaching and support practice. She is also an ICF credentialed coach, certified professional diversity coach, and certified emotions mentor. Heather practiced law as a tax attorney and eventually served as an associate area counsel and director of HQ operations for small business and self-employed division counsel with the IRS Office of Chief Counsel. Heather worked in the federal government almost 2 decades before starting her practice. With that, I am going to pass it over to Heather. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. I am intentionally not using slides because in our time together, I want to connect with you. I want to have a conversation with you because what I will share with you will change the trajectory of your life and the lives of the lawyers and people you interact with daily. What I'll be talking about is fundamental to your diversity, equity, and inclusion work. It is fundamental to who you are as an individual in whatever roles you serve, be it parent, spouse, sibling, child, even a civic leader. But I want you to ponder this question. Mindfulness is great, but how is your heart? How is your heart? Today and yesterday, I've heard over and over that you are the people's people, that you have to have a heart to do this work, and that you must take care of yourself to do DE&I work, which is all true. But how is your heart? The reason I ask that question over and over again is that because having a heart is the one thing that all of us have in common, no matter who we are. It's where we hold our emotion, and it's not in our brains. Our brains are affected when we let pain weigh down our hearts. But that's why when we do mindfulness and meditation and yoga, and if you don't do the grief work, if you've not processed the pain in your heart, the gaping hole is still there in your heart. Someone shared a comment yesterday that one of the sessions, we have to create strategic and sustainable efforts versus creating quick fixes. And if ALFDP wants to strengthen their vision for D&I success, which is your theme, we all have to work on our hearts. How do we do that? We need to focus on lawyer well-being. The legal profession is falling short. The legal profession is falling short when it comes to well-being because we are focusing on the symptoms and not the root cause of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse, which, by the way, result from grief. Lawyer well-being is not an intellectual issue, it's a heart issue. And I know that's a hard thing for lawyers, but it's the truth. Diversity and inclusion initiatives are built into lawyer well-being, and law firms are making pledges and expending funds to be on the cutting edge of it in order to sustain the legal profession. The 2020 ABA Profile of the Profession survey shows lawyers have higher rates of addiction and mental illness. They're higher than the general population. Data shows that 21% qualify as problem drinkers, 28% struggle with depression, 19% have symptoms of anxiety, 11.5% report suicidal thoughts. And you may actually identify secretly with these results. If you answered yes, then learning how to actually acknowledge and manage your emotions is the key to improving your overall well-being and your lawyer well-being. The ABA has actually created a national task force on lawyer well-being, and the definition of well-being includes 6 dimensions. They are occupational, emotional, physical, intellectual, spiritual, and social. But I would argue that the most important one is emotional well-being because it reverberates through all 6 dimensions. It is critically important to notice our emotions and learn how to manage them instead of assuming that mental health is always the issue. Emotional well-being is about the heart and not the head. And we have to do the work ourselves in order for change to take place in law firms and within the legal profession, because we are the legal profession. Until we do that, inclusion will not be sustainable and it will always be a moving target. Because the future of inclusion is about creating sustainable systemic change so that people can bring their true selves to work. I believe that until we start listening to people with our hearts and not our heads, inclusion will not be achievable or sustainable. And we can't create sustainable inclusion efforts when our hearts are filled with pain. The impact of grief is hidden in law firms. You may ask why. It's because we do not know the definition of grief and we live in a grief avoidance society. But grief is the normal and natural reaction to change or loss of any kind. It's not just physical death. Any change, any loss, the emotional response is grief. And there are over 40 types of loss that result in grief. Grief by any other name is still grief. Stress, unresolved grief. Burnout, unresolved grief. Trauma is the event, but the feelings and emotions left over are grief. Depression is unresolved grief. Grief is not mental illness. It's about your heart and the fact that it's broken. Grief is about forgiveness. It's about undelivered communications. It's about wishing things were better, different, or more in a particular relationship. It's about not being seen or heard or validated, but being judged, criticized, and analyzed. Grief greatly impacts a lawyer's ability to concentrate, function, and focus. Consequences of not addressing grief, mental illness, and substance abuse are costing law firms billions of dollars in human capital, revenue, and productivity. And I will tell you this, you're not going to see grief as a data field on the reports that you're looking at. For the lawyer, loss and change are daily issues for our clients, but we tend not to value ourselves enough to manage our own personal loss and change until it's too late. Lawyers, we are not invincible. We are human. And as humans, we experience loss and change daily, but we cannot process what we fail to acknowledge. And when we fail to process loss and change, the impact of grief becomes cumulative, leading to anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. So what causes grief? I would say that as we go through life, we pick up rocks, and it actually begins in childhood. We're born with bright eyes, we're born in harmony, we have intuition, intellect, emotion. But by the time we're between the ages of 2 and 3, 75% of our coping mechanisms and belief systems are set. By the time we're 15, 95% of our default coping mechanisms and belief systems are set, unless we do work intentionally to change our response. We're not taught how to deal with our emotions. We're taught how to deal with emergencies, but not our emotions. Our parents didn't know because their parents didn't know. More things happen as we age, and we don't take the time to empty our hearts, to process our emotions and our feelings. Grief is cumulative. So what are these rocks? Rocks could be pets. Likely a child's first experience with loss is a pet. And if you've never processed that, you're probably still holding on to that as an adult. Moves. Most people don't think of moves as a grief experience, but it is. I moved 5 times in 10 years, and 4 of those 5 happened within 5 years. And every time I moved, I noticed that there was this fuzzy feeling that I had. I was happy that I was moving somewhere else, but I didn't process the loss of leaving where I was. And that's a real thing. Divorce. My parents actually divorced when I was a junior in college. And unconsciously, I carried that pain for 30 plus years and I didn't even realize it. Deaths. My mother and aunt tragically died in a car accident in 2005. And in 2005, if you remember, in New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and I was living there then. So literally after burying my mother and my aunt and dealing with my own injuries from that accident, I had to experience and deal with Katrina. Other rocks, graduations, job loss. Graduations, I will go back to that because it's an exciting moment, but then you're off to something new and you've got to prepare yourself for that, like trying to find a new job, which can be very stressful. Illnesses, changes in health, floods, natural disasters, abandonment, foster care, environmental and climate losses. Change itself causes grief. Also, intangible losses cause grief. And when I talk about intangible losses, I mean loss of safety, loss of trust, which we are dealing with a lot of that in 2020 due to systemic racism, due to the deaths of Black and brown people. We could even experience a loss of faith. I mean, where is God when all of this is happening? That could be the question of some people. We've got to deal with the loss of hopes, dreams, expectations, what normal is. So why is grief so much misunderstood? It's actually one of the most misunderstood and neglected processes because of the myths and misinformation that we have about it. Like most of the time when you're feeling bad, someone automatically tells you don't feel bad. But I would say this, if we don't express, we repress. And that shows up some other place, excuse me, in our lives, whether we want to admit it or not. Replace the loss. Sometimes we go into debt to try to replace losses. But 9 times out of 10, the pain's still there. We get into the wrong relationships because we're trying to replace the loss. But again, the pain from a previous relationship is still there if you haven't processed that. Grieve alone. I want to point out this, if you have children, if you're grieving alone, you're modeling that for your children and they're going to actually take on that performance for themselves. A lot of people grieve alone because they don't think there are options other than mental health options, and they don't want to experience the stigma that goes with that. But what I'm presenting for you today is stigma-free support. Be strong. Some of us are being so strong that we're dying. Keep busy. That's not something I really need to talk about to lawyers because we will find ways to keep busy. It just takes time. That's another myth that we're told. And it's actually one of the most major and destructive myths ever, because time in and of itself does nothing to heal. I know people that have waited 10, 20, 30, 40 years for time to heal and nothing happened until they took action. And that was true for me. I'll share a little bit of my story. I learned early on in life that one of my father's characteristics was that he was void of emotion, emotionally unavailable. And in order for me to move forward with my life, I just decided to put that in my avoid file and move on. But one day, many years later, I encountered my father at work in the form of my supervisor. And I just decided again to put that in my avoid file, which meant I left my job, not because I wasn't good at it, or that I didn't think I had anything to offer, or that I didn't like what I did, because I really did. But because I had never grieved that loss, it showed up later in the work environment when I was at the height of my career. I just want to say, what you resist persists. Time does not heal. Time without action does nothing. Someone mentioned this yesterday in their presentation, talking about numbing versus comfort. There are coping mechanisms that we use that actually confuse us because we think they're helping us, but they're actually just masking our pain. And then we take them to the point where we are numbing ourselves when we don't want to feel. Some of those things are alcohol, drugs, shopping, too much sleep, social media. Then we try to play it off so well, and we nominate ourselves for Academy Award for Best Recovery. Somebody will ask you, how are you? And it just rolls off your tongue that you're fine. But fine really means feelings inside, not expressed. You begin to stuff down until you blow. All of these things actually become our belief systems, and we hold on tight to our belief systems, even though they don't really work for us. And we resist when someone tries to tell us differently. And some of these belief systems are generational. And notice, I want you to notice that the two words belief system starts with a B and an S, BS. Some of these belief systems that we have and carry are BS. Our belief systems are based on our knowledge, our attitudes, which leads to thoughts, beliefs, behaviors. And I want you to think about it. How are your belief systems actually being challenged today? I'm sure you probably would have a long list, but that's something you really need to think about. How are your belief systems being challenged? Ignoring or hiding grief is actually costing organizations, law firms, billions of dollars in human capital and their bottom lines annually. In 2003, the Grief Recovery Institute, which is a nonprofit educational foundation, released the results of a study where they measured how grief affects U.S. businesses financially and in terms of productivity. The Grief Index measured all sources of emotional pain, ranging from miscarriages to pet loss. In 2003, hidden grief in the workplace cost U.S. businesses more than $75 billion annually. That's billions with a B. If you factor in the cost of inflation to 2020, that figure is now over $100 billion annually. This statistic does not specifically refer to law firms, but these are the businesses that law firms serve. In addition to diversity and inclusion, that statistic that I just gave you sets up the business case for creating sustainable change for emotional well-being and lawyer well-being overall. Sustainable systemic change and inclusion requires unique ways to address grief in the workplace. The Grief Index actually emphasized that the lack of effective information about grief is a major problem, and that problem is actually surmountable with better information or more education. So I would ask that you consider partnering with me through the Lawyer Wellbeing Academy in creating heightened awareness of problems associated with grief and educating law firm management, partners, and associates about the availability of solutions to the often life-limiting consequences of unresolved grief. In the Lawyer Wellbeing Academy, we offer lawyers, law firms, and law schools one-on-one coaching and recovery support. We provide workshops, training for law school faculty, training and education for law firm management on well-being, including those that you do for new lawyer orientation. We actually also would do audits of well-being related policies and procedures. So there's a myriad of things that are available. Law firms, I would say at a minimum, should offer grief coaching and recovery support. There should be longer bereavement periods or bereavement leave. And I would suggest that you actually expand the definition of what bereavement means, expand the definition of grief, and offer more education on grief. Because again, we've learned today that grief is not just about physical death. And the grief that, the leave that's available is only like 3 to 5 days. So it's insufficient to cover someone being, having to come back to work, being totally productive after losing someone. Also consider having a grief coach on call or on staff to address the needs of your employees, available at any time, and that should include all types of loss and change that people experience. And if you plan to offer grief coaching and recovery support internally, please make sure that that access is confidential. You may be asking one question, and I'll just go ahead and answer this. How is the Lawyer Wellbeing Academy different from counseling? Well, counseling is problem-focused, and I am not a counselor. I'm a lawyer and I'm a coach and a grief recovery method specialist. And the Lawyer Wellbeing Academy is solutions focused. I provide stigma-free education and support for emotional well-being, which is, to me, the bedrock of sustaining the legal profession. My services are not tied to medical insurance, and they're not tied to mental health diagnoses. The relationship between me and the client is a partnership. No analysis, no criticism, no judgment. Lastly, law firms, I think, need to be proactive in incorporating these practical solutions into their current well-being policies. So lawyers have the option to choose to work through their grief experiences instead of avoiding their feelings before they're actually diagnosed with a mental illness. The natural byproduct of a greater awareness and access to resources will automatically reduce hidden costs and increase the sense of perceived value relative to the fact that lawyers spend more than 1/3 of their adult lives at work. Just to summarize, grief left unresolved is a recipe for disaster that not only impacts the individual person and their families, but it also impacts and bleeds into law firms and into the world. Therefore, grief can no longer remain hidden in law firms. I don't think it can remain hidden in the world anymore, but definitely not in law firms. The hidden costs are too high, and now everyone in the audience here now, who I would like to call, change agents in the room, you now have some practical solutions to address grief at its core. So Reagan, I will now take questions, and then I will actually check the chat as well. Nobody's asked questions, but I'm open to questions, definitely. Hello? Reagan, are you still there? Okay, I see your chat. I'm going to check the chat as well to see if there are any questions.
Hi, Heather. Thank you so much for such a powerful session.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any either.
I'm seeing one. How do you deal with grief en masse? So a whole group of Black people traumatized by a killing. What do you suggest for that?
That is a great question. Again, I would go back to my response of you have to do the work yourself. You have to work on your own grief. A great example of that is I'm a Black person, and I experienced all of the community grief around the loss of George Floyd and the other Black and brown people that have been killed over the years. And the difference is, because I have processed the grief from childhood up to now, I'm in a different space. I'm not trying to process everything that happened to me in my childhood and what's happening in the world. And when you actually do the grief work, what you're doing is you're processing from your dawn of conscious memory up until now. And so this is a toolkit. The tools that you get in this are tools that you can use for everything going forward, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm seeing another question coming in. Have you experienced coaching on diversity with white males and managing their grief since they are leaving privilege behind? And if so, any strategies you can share with us when we speak with them? There's a rephrase if you want me to rephrase it for you. Have you coached white males on diversity and allyship and work with them on their grief in regards to being aware of their privilege and moving away from it?
What I would say is make the business case for it. It's causing, again, go back to it being part of lawyer well-being. Actually, diversity and inclusion initiatives are included in the lawyer well-being initiative that's brought on by the National Task Force on Wellbeing. So white men should be looking for ways to implement this into their law firms. One of the things I've seen with the lawyer well-being initiative is that nobody knows what to do. And this is a way to address not only white males, but everybody, because it deals with the common thing of the heart. And everybody has heart issues. Everybody has things that they are still carrying from childhood into work. Your law degree does not separate you from your life before you became a lawyer. And at some point, whether you do it voluntarily or involuntarily, you will have to process your grief. So it doesn't depend on who you are. This is a universal issue. Universal, it happens there.
Great. How can an ally best assist / provide grief support and comfort?
They should have a listening ear without criticism, analysis, or judgment. A lot of times we try to fix because we're lawyers. We want to fix things. We are problem solvers. We're the ultimate problem solvers, but a lot of people just need to be listened to, validated, and heard. And a lot of what happens is they maybe get a grace period for that, but then all of a sudden the person's like, well, you should be over that. And that just counteracts any and everything you might have tried to do. I would suggest that if you are not educated in grief or a grief recovery specialist, I would suggest that you just listen. I mean, this is a very simple process, but we don't do that. We judge, we criticize, and that's when people continue to repress emotions and stuff never becomes resolved.
A couple other questions. You said what we don't say, we act out. How do we recognize when we're acting out because of grief?
Listen when people tell you. Trust me, when you're acting out, somebody's going to bring it to your attention. But you've got to actually reflect on that. Look at the whole picture. What was my part in this? Because even though it may be something that happened to you, you're still 1%, at least 1% responsible of how you respond or react to it.
How do you address people discounting your grief?
Create boundaries. Realize that's not a person that you can share with, and actually seek stigma-free support through, like I said, a grief recovery method specialist. I would not even actually suggest a psychologist or a psychiatrist, because the symptoms you're probably going to be evidencing are the same symptoms as grief, but they may suggest that you take medication for that. And what that does is mask the pain. You still haven't really processed what happened. Yeah, that's a great question.
Another question. I received 3 days bereavement when my teenage stepson was killed. I was expected to get back to work and felt so much stigma from my bosses and coworkers who were waiting to see if I would be okay. I felt like I was under a microscope to be okay, but also expected to not bring my grief to work. What can workplaces do to structure better support?
Again, I think they need to expand the definition of what grief is. And this was actually a physical death, which would probably fall into the policy that exists now. But in reality, if people are literally thinking with their heads and not their hearts, and not depending on old policies to be the norm now, they would understand that these things need to be expanded. Usually, and the other thing is you need to advocate for yourself. The rules are set, but that doesn't mean that needs to be how things apply to you. have a conversation. Again, a lot of grief is about undelivered communications. We repress these feelings. We keep these things in. We don't share them. And you can't resolve the grief inside unless you deliver that communication. So I would suggest having a conversation, or really considering, if there's pushback on that, that you make sure that the job that you're in aligns with your values, because everything that you do should be aligned with your values. And if you're in an organization where they're not open to, I would say, accommodating your situation, especially within the guise of lawyer well-being. Like I said, lawyer well-being is something that you can use to kind of get law firms to do a lot of things, even D&I wise, because like I said, it's embedded in there, but it's something that is like the hot topic right now. And it's really what's going to sustain the legal profession. But law firms don't know what to do.
When grief is associated with the suicide of a loved one and the shame associated with it, you recommend a different approach one should consider in dealing with it?
No, the tools are the same. You've got to talk about what happened. You've got to complete the pain around that particular relationship with the person. And you can't compare two people can't compare. For instance, I would just say, I have a sister. When my mother passed away, each of us grieved differently. Everybody grieves differently, and we can't compare what the relationship was, because my relationship with my mother was different from my sister's relationship. So again, you've got to seek out people who can actually listen to you without judgment, criticism, or analysis. And that's not everyone, which is why I am not the only grief recovery method specialist. This is available. The website is www.griefrecoverymethod.com. And you can put in your zip code and find a specialist everywhere. I will say this though, I'm probably one of the few lawyers that is a grief recovery method specialist, which is why I felt like this was very important to bring to this audience, because lawyers need this work, lawyers need this stigma-free support.
I think we're going to do the last questions.
Okay.
Law firms are not public service, social justice, therapeutic entities. They are for-profit entities. If you want to be where feelings, and in quotations, are considered, law firms are not the place for you. What's your response to that? I'm assuming this person is asking, how do you respond when somebody says that to you at the firm?
Yeah. Trust me, I had apprehension about even coming forth with this, but I know that it worked for me as a lawyer. But my response to that would be, it's not, well, yeah, law firms are not the place historically where you talk about feelings, but at the rate people are dying and at the rate people are committing suicide and going, looking to substances to numb their pain, the legal profession will not be sustained, and we can't continue to do the same things and expect different results.
Okay, I think we're right on time. Thank you so much, Heather, for a wonderful session. This has been really great, and like a lot of people said in the chat, so needed, especially right now. So thank you so much.
Yeah, if I can just share, if people want to connect with me, my website is www.heatherdhorton.com. And I'm on LinkedIn at Heather D. Horton. And also, if you want to send me an email, it's heather@heatherdhorton.com, and I'll put that in the chat. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm back. Wow, what a great session. I think it's fitting that our last session was on support and the importance of healing and well-being. All of us know that our organizations lean on us and have, very unrealistic expectations of what's possible. And the demands are relentless. And in trying to meet those demands, we put our self-care, our well-being, our mental health, and everything that makes us whole, we put all of that to the side, and we tend to just jump in and try to take care of everyone else and to try to solve the big problem ahead of us. And so it was a great reminder to just take care of ourselves, set those boundaries, learn the power of no. And I'll say, I have learned to start saying no within the past couple of months. And it feels really good to do that. I know a lot of us are afraid to do that because, again, we're perfectionists, right? We want to be able to solve the problems and do everything, but it's not helping our beings. So set those boundaries. Get some professional help if that's what the moment calls for. If it's a grief counselor, if it's a therapist, get your tribe. I am blessed to have many tribes, and I have tribes in the ALFDP family, and they hold me down every day. So it's really important for all of us to get the help that we need, because this work is hard. It's rewarding, but it's also very, very hard. And I think 2020 has just shown and proven just how hard the work can be. So I want all of us to promise ourselves to take care, because that's the most important piece. So thanks again to everyone for an amazing conference. The content was just so on point. Great content, very timely, very relevant. Our speakers, all of our moderators, everybody was just fantastic. Lots of member engagement. We had lots of comments in the chat. The platform gave us the ability to move around to the various tables. What was funny, a couple of people shared the fact that they, on the breaks, had intended to kind of check out of the platform and go do some work, but they found themselves hopping around to the table and met some new friends, which was one of the goals that we had set forth with this platform. So despite the fact that we had to switch everything up this year due to the pandemic, I don't think we could have asked for anything better. Everything was just absolutely terrific. So thanks again to everyone who had a hand in this, but specifically, this was possible due to the very, very, very hard work of our conference committee. So I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank each and every one of them for their contribution. So let's start again with Whitney Smallwood. She served as our chair and she told us where to be and we went there. So thank you so much, Whitney, for all the work that you did. And thanks to Courtney Carter, who served as our board liaison to the committee. And then thanks to everyone else who filled in and played a key role as well. So that's Norma Jackson, Jennifer Carrion, Sonia Montenegro Lopez, Reagan Henderson, Annie Flores, Caitlin Fisher, Monya Bunch, Kia Scipio, again, another board member who chipped in to do triple duty, I think, for Kia, Courtney Moore, Kyra Larson, Daniel Taylor, Carrie Burke, and Janelle Mallard. So again, thank you to each and every one of you. You all put in so much hard work into this. I know how hard it is to plan a conference in a normal environment, and you all really, just rose to the occasion. And I cannot thank you enough. Thank you again. For the rest of us, be on the lookout for a post-conference survey that will be coming out on Monday. We value our member input and feedback, so please just take a second to fill it out when you get it. We are also going to follow up with all of the speakers to say if they would be willing to share their presentation. Some of them have already said yes, but we'll make sure to touch base with all of them. And if we do get the presentations, we will post them to our existing website in the member resources section of the website. And we will also post the conference recording there as well. It will probably take us about a week and a half to get the recording up and posted, but we will certainly let you know when we get it up there. And I think we'll also be able to get a transcript of the chat as well. There were lots of inspirational messages and shout outs in the chat, and I think it would be great to have a record of that. So we may be able to get that transcript. Stay tuned. So I hope you all can join us at the holiday happy hour on December 17th. Stay tuned for an invitation to that. It has been, fantastic. I'm just, again, I'm honored to serve this association, but, it's really because of each and every one of you. You kind of make it easy for me. So thank you for everything. And until we connect again, please take care, stay safe, and be well. Bye, everyone.